Okay, so I would like to welcome everyone to our webinar on impact on genome editing. As you could see from the program, we are going to discuss the impact on science and innovation, as well as social and economic implication of genome editing application. The webinar will be moderated by my colleague Jeremy Sweet, and I'm just giving you a few technical notes. First of all, as you have all been already informed, the webinar will be recorded and made available at PlantEd YouTube channel. If you like to ask questions, please use the Q&A section. In the program, you will see that there is a place for discussions, so we will read your questions. There is also an option to raise hand and ask a question personally if you like, but if there are many questions, the Q&A will be the one. What we also wanted to do during this webinar is to ask you some questions and get your feedback on different aspects of genome editing. So if you go to the chat, you will see the link to Slido survey. And the first question is open for your answers, comments. You need to put a word, a few words, or sentence about the question asked. So please do it, and the questions will be changed in every 15 minutes. So I will let you know in chat when another question will be available, and then we could discuss the results of survey as well. So that's all from me, and now I give the floor to Jeremy to continue. Jeremy.
Right. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. We have an interesting program lined up here with 4 speakers. And first of all, I'd like to introduce Nevena Alexandrova-Stefanova from the FAO based in Italy. And she's going to talk about new breeding techniques and innovating for sustainable food and nutrition security. So over to you, Nevena.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nevena, and I work for FAO, the Office of Innovation, Research and Extension Unit. I'm more than pleased to be with you today and to deliver a presentation mode. However, it's not so easy. Unfortunately. Anyway, I will do my best and to continue. So I'm going to talk about new breeding techniques and in the context of innovations, agriculture innovations for sustainable food and nutrition security. And when I was thinking how I can contribute better to the discussion, being an FAO and not any longer a scientist, I thought it's never useless to remind people why we need new breeding techniques, why we need biotechnologies or overall technologies in agriculture and food systems. So I'm going to spend some time to discuss global challenges, but it may sound trivial to a certain extent. You certainly know those challenges. However, it is striking to understand what's the magnitude and impact on people and communities and ecosystems. So then I will try to identify the needed transitions towards sustainable food systems and also identify priority areas for plant breeding innovations, and then try to place the new breeding techniques in the context of those innovations and try to finish with some conclusions.
Nevena, could you go to full presentation?
Yes.
You click down at the
I am
bottom
trying,
of your screen.
but it's but I
no, you
cannot.
need to go down. You go down to the bottom, right down to the bottom, and where you see the full screen sign.
Fine.
You click on that.
It should be fine now, isn't it?
That's it. Well done. Thank you.
Can you see my full screen now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. So one of the first challenges that we face is the growing food and nutrition insecurity. And unfortunately, for decades, the number of hungry people had been declining, but it is not true anymore. Now we are probably going to have about 10 billion people in 30 years' time. And today we have around 700 million people that go hungry, and 3 billion more people cannot afford a healthy diet. So they suffer from malnutrition. Interestingly, COVID-19 doubled the risk of starvation, which is a very significant figure. Furthermore, we have 144 million children under 5 years of age that are stunned, and 47 million preschool children that wasted because of malnutrition. And the growth of the global obesity rate is a fact, and we have 8 million deaths that were attributable to dietary risk factors 2 years ago, and this trend is on rise. You can see here the percentage of population that are undernourished, and please, the green color is always good, like in the lights, but what is striking is the red and orange, and this is all in the tropical area. So a big part of the world is suffering from undernourishment. Another challenge, the smallholders and family farms and the risk of exclusion of vulnerable people in the country, but also exclusion from one country to another, from developed and developing world. Today we know that 75% of the world poor are rural, and most are involved in farming. So the face of the poverty is rural. 90% of all farms worldwide are family farms. So it's a considerable potential that not much attention had been paid before. Luckily, we have the decade of family farms that started in 2018 and will end at 2028. So this is definitely an opportunity also for new breeding techniques, new genome editing techniques to contribute to this to smallholder farming and family farming and be visible. Also, smallholders provide up to 80% of the food supply in nation sub-Saharan Africa, and globally 75% of the whole food. And in European Union, smallholders are 40 to 45% of the farm structure. And 47% of the labor force in agriculture are from rural women. So this, again, is an aspect that needs to be considered. Youth potential is also very specific, particularly in Africa and Asia. So particular attention to youth labor in agriculture should be paid. Then we have climate change and shrinking the resource base. So food systems are estimated to be responsible for 34% of the total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. A big part of it is due to livestock production, but it's about 80%. There are also growing outbreaks due to climate change in the transboundary pests and diseases, and they cost a lot to the global economy. They cost about $220 billion every year. And of course, it's the situation is complicated. The response is complicated due to the antimicrobial resistance that is developing very fast. Then we have 80% of the hectares of the annual forest net loss that is attributable to the land expansion. You can see on the graph the availability of land and water in some of the exporter countries and also in the rest of the world. Unfortunately, sub-Saharan Africa presents a potential theoretically of available land, but there is a great percentage of soil degradation, as you can see on this map. So globally, 29% of the global land is degraded. Crop and livestock sectors, in addition, use 20% of freshwater resources, and livestock alone uses 80% of the global crop and pasture areas. So more land is needed for the fastest developing sector of aquaculture. So you see it as a great demand for land, and saving resource technology, saving land technologies would be particularly useful. We also face a significant biodiversity loss. 75% of the world's crop diversity has been lost in the 20th century. More than 600 livestock breeds have gone extinct, and globally species extinction risk has worsened about 10% over the last 3 decades. And the same is the situation in the fish stocks that are below the maximally sustainable level. So this puts again a pressure on for our food, and particularly for the most vulnerable people like smallholders and family farms. And we also know that today our food comes only from 70% of our food comes from 12 plants and 5 animal species. And even more from the great variety of the edible plant species, we use only 150 to 200, but only 3, the rice, maize, and wheat, contribute to 2/3 of the calories and proteins, 60% that are used by humans in plants. So production needs to be increased, also in respect to dietary shifts. Although we talk about a holistic food system approach, we still need to focus on production. It's one of the parts of the food system. The production, we know that crop production would need to increase with 56 or 60% compared to the base in 2010. And the crop yield is too low for comfort. You can see the graph for the cereals, wheat, rice, maize, soybeans, that demonstrates this decline in yields, in the growth of the yields. And definitely there is a great demand for animal-based food due to the increase of the mid-income countries and emerging economies. So the food is projected to increase by nearly 70% of the demand for animal-based food, despite of the fact that there are attempts and strategies to convert the protein base from animal to plant that would put additional pressure on the plant breeding. Food loss and waste. We are losing 1/3 of our food that is originally intended for human consumption. This is equal to 670 million tons per year that is wasted by developed countries. And you can see on the map the dark blue spots that are associated with this food waste. Usually in high-income countries, the food is wasted on the end stages of the food system. This is the retail and the consumer levels, while comparably the same amount of food is lost in low and mid-income countries, but this is more on the post-harvest and processing stages of the food production. And food waste contributes to malnutrition and generates green gas emissions, particularly methane. So viable strategies to cope and mitigate food loss and waste are very needed. So here I tried to summarize the key transformation that are needed towards sustainability or achieving the sustainable development goals that our governments committed strongly to achieve with Agenda 2030 that will come very soon. So ending hunger, zero hunger, is a prerequisite for any sustainability action. We cannot progress to have a more environmentally friendly production if we have people that are systematically undernourished. So increased focus should be given to smallholders and family farms and the most vulnerable people that are men, women, or youth. There are needed shift from production to food system approach. And again, that we should not underestimate the production that is very needed in many parts of the developing world. But we should pay due attention to food waste and food loss and possibilities for cycling and economy. We also should focus on a decreased use of chemicals and inputs in order to save resources and a shift towards resource saving and climate resilience instead of yield focus. More increased biodiversity and increased focus on sustainable diets, nutrition, and food safety. So how we can do that? We can only do that through an increase of the pace and the number of innovations that add value to farmers and the communities. Let's take a step back and see what an innovation is. So there are different definitions of innovations, and probably the most simple one is that this is something new in a particular context and something that is useful and used. So innovations can be various types. There is an innovation process that is a process and should be supported with specific capacities, but there are particular innovations that are products or processes or forms of organization that have been put in practice and added value in particular contexts. But let's see what agricultural technologies we have. When we talk about new breeding techniques, we should know that they are part of a whole range of agricultural technologies that need to be harnessed for innovating and for resolving problems related to sustainable development. We have biotechnologies that include new breeding techniques. We have digital technologies, that we have renewable energy technologies related to wind, ocean, solar, and hydrological, geothermal, and bioenergy sources. And we also have mechanization. Let's focus, of course, on biotechnologies. And in FAO, we use the definition of the Convention of Biological Diversity, that is about very large and broad. It's any technological application that uses biological systems, living organisms, or derivatives thereof to make or modify products and processes for specific use. And here you can see some of those technologies, biotechnologies. In FAO, we use one word for low tech and high-tech biotechnologies. Low tech stemming from fermentation processes, conventional crossbreeding, embryo rescue, and so on. And also high-tech technologies like genome editing, for instance, or microbiome use of plastic production through microorganisms or bioplastics, and etc. All those technologies have their place in innovating process. Concretely, for plant breeding innovations, we can identify some priorities that are based on the needed transformation shifts. And for combating hunger, we definitely should focus on the staple foods that produce the great part of the calories for humanity. That's the wheat, the maize, the rice, cassava, and banana. For all these, there are applications in genome editing and new breeding techniques that can be vital strategies to contribute to combating hunger. Smallholders' needs focus. We can talk about orphan crops that are also called forgotten crops or underutilized crops that are not so much explored as monoculture. However, they have their place for smallholders, and they also hold a greater biodiversity and sources for resistance and nutrients. The examples from new breeding techniques include potato digestibility, chickpea drought tolerance, and many others. And for sustainable food systems, for food loss and waste, there are examples of technologies for potato, no browning, strawberry, and tomato for longer shelf life. Less chemicals, definitely strategies related to pest and insect resistance or micronutrient efficiency could definitely help in wheat, in maize, in rice, cassava, banana, cacao tree, and many others. Climate resilience, drought tolerance, pest and insect resistance, and water efficiency, for instance, or decrease of green gas emissions. We have such products already in rice. Biodiversity, the strategy here is the de novo domestication, when we take a wild crop and engineer it into in particular loci that produce yield or specific other desired traits in the domesticated product. And then we also would be able to have the wild crop potential that could not be utilized. So this is a really very fast method that would save not decades, centuries of breeding. And sustainable diets, in my view here, the potential of the genome editing techniques is really great, and impact could be enormous for healthier plants, enhanced nutrient content, for fiber, digestibility, etc. And there's a whole variety of products that are already on the market, ranging from reduced alkaloid content in tobacco and poppy and coffee, the decaffeinated coffee that is already engineered and grows, micronutrients for lycopene, carotene, into increased content, digestibility in wheat, for instance, low gluten content, increased oleic acid content, and reduced allergenity, like in peanuts or ryegrass. We also have a tearless onion that is definitely appealing on the consumer side. So we have the instruments, and our scientists do work on resolving all these problems that we face in agriculture and food systems. However, what do we need from the technology to become an innovation? We need this technology to be used in order to be able to generate impact and to add value. For that end, however, we need an enabling environment. We need policies that are supportive regulations. We need good communication and a lot of capacities and strong institutions. I also would like to send a message across that we have many different innovations. We have technological innovations, organizational innovations, policy innovations, and so far. And if we need to map the new breeding techniques just as a presence, as a share of these technologies, they are probably a small part, but they can have a great impact if they are allowed to do so. So just to finish and summarize the key points of my presentations, globally, the food and agriculture are facing unprecedented challenges, and a transition is needed to more sustainable, efficient, effective, and inclusive food systems. And new plant breeding techniques can offer a significant benefits and can be part of the solution. However, not everyone can benefit equally from those technologies. So policies and enabling environment is are very needed. I would like to you to pay attention to a specific request from the United Nations General Assembly that urged the nation to pay specific attention to smallholders and family farms from one hand, and they also requested developed countries to transfer technology and help developed countries, in particular related to biotechnologies and genome editing techniques. And this could be a weird situation with respect to European Union, where there are regulatory issues with respect to new breeding techniques. So how European Union would be in a position to help developing countries? And again, let's not forget that no technology alone can resolve the problems in agriculture, but a combination of technologies can make a strong impact. So it's never the solution. The problems of the farmers are so complex that just one technology, like biological aspect, cannot make a sustainable innovation. There should be a lot of arrangements that are placed on the ground that could be from organizational innovation nature, they could be from other technologies or agricultural approaches like agroecology, for instance. And only the combination can make a true impact and can help resolving the problems that we unfortunately late in addressing. Thank you very much. And here with this picture, I really hope that genome editing could make the bridge between food security and poverty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nevena. Dragana, do we have any questions for Nevena?
Yes, we do have one question. It is about the information on crop diversity. So it was asked, Roberto Defez asked, 75% of crop diversity was lost between 1900 and 2000. Do you mean we change or lost 75% of all cultivated crops, or you refer to the whole vegetal biodiversity? Nevena, do you have comments?
Yes, it's the agricultural biodiversity.
Okay, that's all from the questions. And just a reminder to take part in the survey. We shall change question in a few minutes.
Right, okay, thanks very much, Nevena. I think it's interesting, particularly with the G7 meeting in the southwest of our country. I hope that they are considering some of these issues that you have raised. Now we move to the next speaker. Let me just get up the details. So I'd like to introduce Marcel Kuntz, who is Director of Research at the CNRS in France. And he's going to talk about understanding the benefits and risks of new breeding techniques and the potential contribution of the technology. So over to you, Marcel. Marcel, if you click, that's it. Yeah, okay. And don't forget to unmute.
Oh, I have to, sorry. I guess you can hear me now.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
So good morning, everybody, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me. My original title was Understanding the Benefits and Risks of NBT and the Potential Contribution of the Technology. I would like to switch a little bit away of this title, or to maybe to improve it by considering, I have a problem. Can you, it doesn't move forward. What is wrong?
If you just click on your presentation and move forward as usual on the presentation.
It doesn't do anything, unfortunately.
You just exit presentation mode and try again. Sometimes it gets blocked.
Okay, let me share again. No.
Will it not advance?
You just exit full screen mode and go like a small slides, and then you will be able to change. Sometimes it works only like that. Okay, and now you change slides. That's the only way.
Okay, so what I would like to add to the title is the understanding the ideological context of perceived benefits and risks. And I fully agree with what was said during the previous talk. Simply, I want to add one topic, which is ideology, because I found very striking that from the late 90s, we have heard all these arguments, these scientific arguments, these technological arguments in favor of technology, of transgenic plants, and about new breeding technologies. And it has not changed anything for politicians, for the media. And a second thing which I found very, very striking is the difference between Europe on one side and the USA on the others. And it's very strange to me, because I think we both part of the world belong to the same how to say, civilization, the same culture to some extent. Also, there are differences. And how can we explain that the way technology is used or not used on the other side is so different? So I thought we have to understand the ideological context, and to understand the ideological context, we have to go back to history and to understand why this ideology is so different and what are the historical background. So I'm not going to give you, don't be frightened, a lecture about history, but I just want to remind you of a few steps about the history of Europe. And you know all these tragic events. I don't have to comment on them. But what happened after World War II, I think, was that Europe was convinced that we should avoid repetition of these tragic events. And to do so, Europe and the pioneer of the European Union considered that Europe should now be based on big principles, and this big principle should even rule the world to avoid such tragic events. And this big principle, you all know them, we all agree with them, which is democracy, rule of law, human rights, and so on. But even the best ideas could go wrong somehow. And I think we probably, it's my idea, you can disagree with it, of course, that they went too far to some extent. And I would like to summarize this in this kind of little picture, showing the switch from the modernist era to the postmodernist era. And this happened late 60s, in the 70s, and is now the ideological dominant view in Europe and even in the States. But I'll come back to the difference between States and the States and Europe. So modernism was characterized by the Enlightenment values, with universalism, and of course some more negative aspects such as imperialism. To the opposite, and postmodernism is not just a late phase of modernism, it's something that some ideas that try to deconstruct modernism. And what characterized them is cultural relativism and what some others have called Western guilt. Of course, this, I don't want to go too far in details. It's of course very different from country to country, between the Western part of Europe and maybe the Central and Eastern part of Europe. But anyway, it's something that that exists, and I could cite you many examples of this, where it can spread very rapidly in Europe and also in the States. So what is common between Europe and the States is that this country want to show how virtuous they are because they have these big principles. And to some extent, this has been transposed to science and technology. And I'll try to convince you now that the same scheme can apply to science and technology. So we also had, about science and technology, some tragic events. You all know them. I'm not going in details. They are linked to technologies. To some extent, we have to agree that they are linked to science. And maybe the dawn of this postmodern era about science and technology maybe can be dated to this book that you all know. Probably some of you, most of you read it, which is by Rachel Carson and called Silent Spring. It was about pesticides. So we all decided that we have to avoid, and it was a common ideology, we have to avoid repetition of such tragic events. And to do so, more big principles were invented. And precautionary principle in Europe, participation of civil society in Europe and in the States. And to some extent, these good ideas also went too far. And we have, especially in Europe, some nonsensical regulation, and I think the GMO regulation is quite a good example of that. We have non-science-based bans, and we gave a strong power to activist organization, and because it's a kind of idea that has spread that you need to discuss with society, which is fine, but actually we don't, most of the time we don't discuss with society, we discuss with activists. So this could explain that risk assessment and management became highly ideological and political. So I'm just citing the lower part of this slide, some publication, because I'm working on this for some years now. So if you want to read them, most of them are in open access. So now, if we go back to my little pendulum scheme, we can try to understand the implication for science and technology. Modernism was characterized by a strong belief in truth, in reason, in progress of society, of humanity, and so on, and was quite optimistic about what science and technology can provide. Of course, there were negative aspects, maybe excessive belief and optimism, which could call positivism, scientism, especially in the 19th century. To the contrary, postmodernism is rather characterized by relativism, subjectivity, has a strong emphasis on risks, and is rather pessimistic about the use of science and technology. This leads, especially in the media, but also for politicians, a sense of distrust in technology. It's very interesting to, if you look at older means just maybe 20 years ago, report by scientific society, science academy, and so on. And you quite often see some sentences meaning that in its best interest, society has to listen to scientists because scientists are experts, scientists know and know best than the rest of the society. And now we have just the opposite view, the other extreme view, I would say, which is that actually scientists should listen to society, even if society doesn't know, are not experts in the field. And this is typically the stakeholder involvement ideology. Of course, I have nothing about discussing with people. That's not the point. Is that when we talk to society, actually it means we are facing activists and not really the society in a democratic way. So modernism has caused accidents, mistakes were made, but my strong feeling is that we make more mistakes with postmodernism. So maybe we should try to find a kind of middle ground, but that's not that easy because you don't change ideology that easily. So another way of seeing things is that you go back to two concepts of modernism, for instance, democracy and independence of justice, which is of course fine, and we all going to agree with that. But there was a shift, I could even call it a perversion of this concept, which I call democratism and power of judges or government of judges. And this is quite obvious, I think, for technology like plant breeding and what happened, for instance, with the ruling of the European Court of Justice on mutagenesis. So democratism means that you favor relativism, you favor adversarial debates over scientific process, and stakeholders should engage. It's not just that scientists will engage the society, it's that the stakeholder should get involved in scientific processes. And this has actually, as the transgenic plant story has shown, has not solved any problem. And just to the contrary, we had a radicalization of opinion from stakeholders, and the way that on risk how the politicians quite often behave. So either they obey to judges because this is the context that they created. They usually give in to activists, and when they decide something, it's rarely based on science. They tend rather to decide in confusion. So, but if we come back now to the difference between European Union and the USA, this is all true, what I just show you here, in the States and in Europe. So why is it different in Europe and in the States? So actually, there is a big difference that the USA consider itself as a power, a superpower, and they have what I could call a will to power. And to do so, they do not forget the industry. The industry is very important. While in Europe, the European Union was not based on a will to power, just the opposite. It was based on, let's avoid war, we should not impose anything. We don't want power. Our absolute priorities are consumers and environment. And this leads very easily to excess regulation. And even I don't think I'm exaggerating by talking about industrial and technological suicide. If you look what happened to transgenic plants. So now, I think this should be taken into account when we talk to society, when we talk to politicians. Of course, we have to bring scientific data. I'm not saying we should not, but I think we should also keep in mind that there is more to the stories than just bringing scientific data, and we will bring, most of you will bring excellent scientific data, but there is more to the story than scientific data. Now, just to finish very rapidly, if you want to play a little game, you can spot this postmodern ideological markers in the recent European Commission study on new genomic techniques. So I read this report in details, and I just have some part of it for you here. For instance, the two priorities, environment and consumers. I just copied here a few paragraphs of the report, and I highlighted in red what is linked to consumers, and in green what is linked to environment. And it's this mixture of both colors, this brownish color, when it concerns both. And you can see this appears quite heavily in this report. And I don't have time to go in details. About democratism and relativism, I think really the core of the report was to to find out what people are thinking, what stakeholders are thinking. And you have a chapter on stakeholders that see benefits in NGTs and stakeholders who do not see benefits in NGT. It's not very surprising. And actually quite naively, in my opinion, that you have sentences like effort should be made to reconcile opposing views. My personal opinion is that for activists, it's just impossible. But this is the dominant ideology. And you also, I didn't mention this before, but there's another characteristic of postmodernism, which is the ethical groups or ethical committees. Of course, I have nothing against ethics, and ethics was part of the modern views, and even much more older, because we have, I think ethics is as old as philosophy. And we had this already in the ancient Greek, for the ancient Greek philosophers, as you know. But what is a characteristic of postmodernism is that you have groups of ethics, which is quite different than ethics. And don't have time also to discuss it, but I could find in this, I was interested to find this in the report. And here also, we have a statement that new edited plans could have a positive or negative impact. Of course, it's not very surprising. And care must be taken to minimize harm and maximize benefits. Okay, we all agree with this, but did we really need an ethics committee to find out this such statements? I'm not sure. So I think there's a little bit of dead end here in what ethical groups can provide. Yeah, there is basically no mention of power, economical power in this report. The best I could find was this paragraph, which mentioned a negative impact of both public and private research and innovation, a competitive disadvantage, and maybe a brain and technology strain. But that's quite weak in the considering the power or the economical aspect. And I think this is quite typical of the current dominant ideology in the European Union. So to conclude, this is taken from my recent Frontiers paper. It may look a little bit harsh as a conclusion, but I think it's a big problem. The big problem is that decked out with this big principle, Europe thinks they are virtuous. They are on the side of great virtue. And it's difficult to convince politicians to behave differently. And it was because of the precautionary principle. It was quite obvious that the gene editing product would be considered as GMO because it's part of the ideology. So I think, as it states now, it is unlikely that the European Union will react appropriately on gene editing, on any scientific data that can be provided, unless, and this is maybe the optimistic conclusion, unless scientists can invoke other big principle of superior virtue. And this could be that, for instance, the EC report or the Green Deal is based on making Europe the first climate neutral continent. And maybe we should really continue to show the politicians that without technology, without the virtue of technology, these big ideas are not going to be achieved, just going to fail. And you have to show them that technology is virtuous. So I would like to finish by thanking all those who have contributed to show the virtue of technology and to the European Union, and this is to some extent visible in the report. And I think we should continue in the next round of discussion, because I think, as far as I understand, we're going to have more and more discussion on the topic. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marcel. I think there are a number of questions that have come through the chat, and Dragana is going to deal with those. So over to you, Dragana.
Okay, so we have a comment more from Eric Toussaint, and I will give him a word. Maybe you would like to comment and discuss this with Marcel. Eric, you are unmuted. Eric?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. So okay. Could you comment, please?
Yeah. So Marcel, you didn't say it straightforward, but it felt a little that you were not fine with the idea that the European Union was putting the consumer, or say the people and the environment, so central. It sounded as if you were not happy with that. And I think recent examples like the PFAS and the Chrome 5 show that we should have been maybe even more cautious in using technologies. So I'm a bit confused there that you don't like the idea of putting people and the environment first, but rather the economy first. You didn't say it straightforward like that, but it felt in the way you spoke about it.
Well, of course, I have nothing about protecting the environment and the economy. I just think it's a matter of balance. And I don't think it's impossible to reconcile both aspects, the economy and the consumers and the environment. And this is especially what technology can provide. But I have the feeling that the European Union was really concentrating on one side. And it was really strange to me, some aspects like, for instance, the golden rice, transgenic rice, how it was almost impossible to also these strains, they have all the qualities that are requested by the opponents of the technology, and it was impossible to convince the European in the European context of the importance of this rice, and so I think it's a typical example of how protecting not the environment in this case, also it was a little bit mentioned, but how could you protect the consumer more than basically stopping them from having a deficit in vitamin? And it was not, it didn't convince the European Union. We financed some organization who was fighting against golden rice. So I think the balance is really, I think if you remember the pendulum image, I think we are too far on one side. And I'm not saying we should go back to full length on the other side. We should find a middle ground, which is a right balance. Okay, I'm not sure I really reply to your criticism, which I understand. That I agree with it.
Okay, thank you, Marcel.
Okay, thank you, Marcel. There is also a question from Hilde-Gunn. So Hilde-Gunn, please take the floor.
I'm just curious, Marcel, I didn't read this report thoroughly. Which countries didn't find any problems to the ruling?
To be honest, I don't know. I didn't find the details because I think we have to go to look at another part. I'm not sure. Maybe somebody in the audience can answer this question. But to be honest, I didn't really. I didn't look in details on this.
But I really enjoyed your ideology and putting that focus to it, because I think it's a lot of that and not so much science or sustainability or food production. So thank you. I really enjoyed it.
And there is also a question from Felix Moronta. How could we young scientists try to neutralize this postmodernism cool trend? So Marcel, do you have comments?
Well, again, I will have a pessimistic comment, because if I look, I can only talk about France as a French institution, scientific institution. And I think they're just diving in this ideology. And it's really strange because there are many aspects where they prefer to be on the side of great virtue, at least from a media point of view, than defending science. If you look at my institution, which is FINRES, you will not find anything to defend technology, to defend plant breeding, to defend any controversial technology. They have to show how great they are and how they are going to save the world. And so it's very difficult because you don't have really many support from the institution. But fortunately, we have other organizations. We have EPSO, we have EU SAGE, some of you may know. And by the way, I would like to thank Dirk Inze for this EU SAGE initiative, and also Wana Dima, who is really very active and very enthusiastic. So we have to continue and not give in to this ideology. But I think it's difficult. It will be difficult to change it, but at least we can point to it. We can say to politicians, look, what you are doing is not reasonable. It's just an ideology. And one characteristic of ideology is that people don't know they are in an ideology. They think it's just normal like this. But actually they were brought to think like this by propaganda of many, during many decades, and they don't know that it's an ideology. So maybe pointing to them that it's an ideology could be helpful.
Okay, Felix, do you have comments? Felix?
He's responded by saying thank you.
Okay. Then we have another question from Hilde-Gunn. So would you like to ask it personally?
Thank you. Yes. I'm wondering if we really got hungry, do you think that could help? Like, even though, like in France, you still have a lot of anti-vaccine people, but I think with the COVID-19, they still will take it. So
yes, it's changing. I think the figures of people opposed to vaccination really went down, which is normal, and it's a rational way of thinking. You don't really trust the politician, the French one, which, okay, I'm not going to say anything to defend the French politician because I would be lying, but it's a rational way of thinking that you don't trust and you wait and see, and afterwards you see that millions of people have been vaccinated and you start to trust. So it's not irrational, it's quite rational to do so. But there will be a number of people that will not be convinced, and okay, I don't know what we can do, probably not much with people that really don't want to be convinced. And it's the same thing for GMOs, it's the same thing for many other technology.
And one, if I may add, do you think ideology and ethics are a bit the same part? Because to me, a lot of it is moral when they talk about ethics, because ethics is also based on a value perspective, right?
Yes, of course, but there is no universal ethics.
No.
So the problem with the ethical commission, and maybe many people will say, well, no, we don't agree, we need ethical commission, and I can understand this. But the problem is it will strongly depend on the composition of the ethical committee. And this was also seen in my country about bioethics on medicine, and where the opinion has changed. And I think it's simply because the composition of the committee has changed. And so one should, I'm not really saying that we should not have ethical committee, but they should recognize that there is no universal ethics, and they not try to impose their own views on the society just because they were fortunate to be part of an ethical committee.
I think coming back to the point you made, Marcel, about the risks and benefits the problem is that the population generally is too focused on risk and not benefit. The benefit of the vaccine is that people have a certificate which shows that they can travel freely around Europe and, like Detlef, go and watch football matches and so on. And of course, people say, oh, right, okay, I'm going to have the vaccine. And to hell with the fact that it's a GM virus that's been stuck into my arm, I will still go ahead because it gives me all these personal benefits. In relation to GM foods, crops, people don't see an individual personal benefit. So they say, why should I consider even taking the risk? And I think this is the difficulty. And I think, putting your talk together with Nevena's has shown that there is a huge international problem of food supplies, starvation. Millions of people are actually at risk and currently dying because of food shortages. And technology is one answer to it. And yet the majority of people, particularly in the developed world, do not see this as a risk or a problem and just go happily on because every day they can go to the supermarket and get what they want. So I think, as you say, it's very much an issue of perception. Unless I personally am confronted by a benefit, I will not take the risk. And I think this is the attitude of so many people, and particularly of politicians.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that sociologists have pointed to this already in the late 90s about transgenic plants, that they didn't see any personal benefit at the short term. Yeah. So why taking the risk? And this is the big problem. And obviously for vaccination, it shows just an opposite situation. But it will be difficult if we just remember Nevena's before presentation, that all these facts which are true, but the benefit for let's say the European population is not always obvious if you try to convince them that you have to feed the world. And this. So
Nevena, do you want to come back and make a comment on that? No. Oh yes.
I fully agree with what had been said. Policies need to be based on realities and real demands and support real demands of farmers and consumers. However, it is difficult in the current political economy model and democratic roles to convince the policymakers to do what is needed to do, because they think not in long term, but in 4 years term in most of the cases. So what is very much important here is to create a strong community and build communities that understands the issue and provide advocacy through communication. In my view, we are still closed communities. And I relatively recently participated in one very interesting conference process that was related to plant breeding and sustainable development. However, I was not happy to see, to listen the same arguments that I've been listening 30 years ago with the same people. So it's high time that we open up, and again, I believe international organizations like FAO can play a role. Hopefully we have new developments in FAO. We have strong emphasis on science and innovations, and we hope that we will be able to support our member states more strongly than now. FAO also partners with the European Union on research and innovation. So hopefully we can also be able to influence each other. Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, okay. Dragana, I'm not sure how we're doing for time, but maybe we should move on to the next presentation.
Maybe we just have a comment about the work in South Africa and African continent, and maybe we sometimes forget about other continents when we are talking about genome editing. So maybe Manuela Campa could just give us another point of view, which is not the European one. Manuela, would you, oh, sorry. Manuela, would you like to have a word about?
Hi, yes. Hi, everyone. Yes, I found what has been said about benefits and risk very interesting, because so in South Africa, GMO are cultivated. Obviously, there is a regulation and there is a certain rules. And now there is a lot of talking about genome editing and how it should be regulated. And the main problem is that if we follow the American example, then all the products that are cultivated, then they will be seen as a risk from European Union, and they might lose the market, and they can't afford that. So this is a bit, and this is a big problem, because obviously, you know, for the farmers would be much better to use products that are that have a better yield, or that they are resistant to pathogens, and so on. So, but then if they can't sell them, then it's a problem. So I think this is something that we should consider also, and that Europe probably doesn't consider, that they are like damaging other continents that really need to sell their products. Yeah, that is my comment.
Okay, thank you. Anyone has comment to that, or we may proceed? Okay, Jeremy, to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Interesting discussion, and I'm sure some of this will continue towards the end of the webinar. Now I'd like to introduce Detlef Bartsch from the BVL in Germany, and he will be talking about the environmental impacts of GE crops and responses to climate change. So over to you, Detlef.
Yes, thank you very much, Jeremy. I hope you can hear me well. So thank the organizers for inviting me, and hope I managed to, oh yeah, here's the presentation. So my task is to talk on environmental impacts of genome edited crops and responses to climate change. And as Jeremy just pointed out, I'm working in a more governmental decision-making environment. And here, my first slide on the EU regulatory environment designed for GMOs. And as we all know, the judgment of the European Court of Justice declared all genome edited plants as GMOs. So the applicants with nice ideas of crops just being it for import or for cultivation in the EU need to seek a risk assessment opinion by the European Food Safety Authority, where my institution here on the right side, the BVL, as national authority, give comments and requests. And then comes the next step, the separation between risk assessment and risk management, the negotiation step between the Commission and member states, which is a very tricky thing because all other aspects, political perception comes in, and when voting comes, it's our ministry that decides, and we are consulted but not always heard in this decision-making step. And finally, there should be a good decision, but nevertheless, in most cases, even on imports, the EU member states do not reach a qualified majority, and it's the Commission that decides on imports. And we have not seen any positive decision on a cultivation for, let's say, more than the last 20 years. So it's a very tough process. It's messy, it's unforeseeable for applicants, and the whole process of collecting data costs at least 10 million euros per event that wants to be placed on the market. Coming back now to my field of experience, so I'm a plant ecologist, and talking about climate change, we have to look on the receiving environment. And what we will see in the future, and Nevena has already mentioned some examples, we will see melting ice and rising seas. We will see extreme weather, shifting rainfalls. And there are some forecasts, especially for Europe, that southern and central Europe are seeing more frequent heat waves, forest fires, and droughts. Northern Europe is getting significantly wetter, and winter floods could become common. There is an increased vulnerability to biotic stress, for example, herbivores, pests, and pathogens. And we will see a wildlife change up to extinction, new biological invasions, including plant pests, which will influence or impact agriculture. Some have already mentioned the new EU Commission study, and one part of this study is shown here. It's the a study from the joint research group. Claudia Parisi and Emilio Rodriguez Cerezo have provided a very, very good overview of what we can expect in the near future for the genome editing plant pipeline. And what is seen here is are the 4 development stages. So from the commercial products being the orange one, over pre-commercial stage, advanced research and development stage, and the early research and development stage. And what you can see here that many, many traits are in the pipeline that would address impacts of climate change. So I think on number 2 in terms of application of research application that's in the pipeline, biotic stress tolerance, or on place 4th, biotic stress tolerance, or even plant yield in architecture, and the top of all is the modified composition. So we have a number of interesting, innovative things coming, but nevertheless, it's, as we have already heard, it's quite difficult to bring them finally on the market. And the 2 commercial products we see here on the upper left corner, the modified composition, they are from the US and from Japan at this moment. And it will be a long way, and I do not expect anything in the EU under the current legislative conditions. So another step, so environmental risk assessment, environmental risks of genome edited plants. So what you see here is a rough categorization of my experience in terms of what can happen and where we should look at. The first is number A, the intention of the genetic modification. So the intended effect, it's not so sexy for the risk assessors. We mostly look on unintended effects. Marcel, yes, it's a cultivation thing in terms of human perception. And in terms of detectability, we can only look on something that can be identified in a risk assessment, in an organized risk assessment process, which is limited in time and in resources. And we have a backup for non-identifiable, unanticipated effects we put on the monitoring side. So there is a backup. And then very interesting, when we then look on the biological level, what can or could happen. I think when I start here from the bottom, I think it's quite easy to look on the genome. So direct or immediate effects of any modification can be, let's see, relatively easily be detected. And when you then go further up in biological organization, it's decreasing in power of the risk assessment with the increasing biological level. And environmental effects, they happen on population and ecosystem levels. And in terms of the EU legislation, the terms we use is indirect or delayed or long-term inclusive, including cumulative effects. And the art of risk assessment is just to scale up the data you have on the lower levels, from the genome to organism to the higher level, and that can be done. Don't be worried about this. One example is the DNA, the classical DNA insertion effect, or the pleiotropic effects, where I think you can relatively easily look on direct or immediate effects. And when you do not see with certain tests anything happening there, then I think you can be relatively sure that there's nothing happening on a higher level. Another very important thing to be considered is the comparative approach. And this is one of my favorite cartoons on that, of two persons sitting on a sofa and saying, I want anything that's genetically modified or genome edited. It could be unhealthy. And yes, whatever you do, there is a certain risk. And the comparative approach means that what's the difference if you are eating a genetically modified or genome edited potato chips or high sugar containing drinks compared to those where something conventional compared to the transgenic one. So that's very important. And that's something where we also face the problem of many lobbying groups ignoring that we always do comparisons in science. And the first choice of comparison, and I must confess it's a huge table, but it's a very important review that was recently published by Stacy Singer and colleagues on the sources of genetic variation and unintended risk in the context of old and new breeding techniques. And I highly recommend to, if you don't know this so far, have a look at it. And there are in this table one, for both for Arabidopsis and rice, a number of reviews or literature sources included what is happening on the genomic level in terms of variation, small nuclear type exchanges, larger variations. And the basic conclusion is that if you compare between generations, intravarietal changes, or tissue culture, radiation, chemical mutagenesis, transgenic modifications with the new CRISPR-Cas genome editing. I think most of you know this, but the molecular effects or off-target effects are so small compared to other things we do actively in breeding, that this is a good starting point in risk assessment. And for most cases, if you apply the comparative approach, you can, it's my opinion, you can already stop there and say it's as safe as at least classical breeding. Nevertheless, the EU system foresees a very complex step system where we start with in the environmental risk assessment with a problem formulation, including hazard identification. This is, by the way, taken from EFSA documents. Then you go to the hazard characterization, the exposure characterization, all of this forms the risk characterization. Then you look on risk management strategies if you have detected any risk, and then comes at the end the over risk evaluation and the conclusions. And finally, as I said, the environmental monitoring after the placing on the market takes place. And the key issues are always in the beginning, what's the harm? Now that's where people already, a number of stakeholders would disagree. For many of them, even the poor presence of a genome edited plant in the environment would be harm, which is maybe a moralic argument and not a scientific one. Then the next question is, how much data do you need to collect to have sufficient information to conclude? And there's a huge disagreement among member states in Europe. And then what I already also mentioned, the transfer of always limited information to the receiving environments. And we have to focus here. And finally, the trade-off between the assessment step and the duration of this assessment and the decision deadline. And I tell you, the EU law foresees a 1-year period normally for taking a decision, which has been never met during the last 20 years. So except maybe for vaccination, the new vaccinations, where we have skipped a number of steps in environmental risk assessment. Okay, just to mention that these 6 steps, which I've just mentioned in terms of environment, you have to look as for classical GMOs on persistence and invasiveness, horizontal gene transfer, target organisms, non-target organisms, impact of cultivation practices, impact of biological processes, and finally on human and animal health. And you have to consider comparators, long-term effects, whether you have different receiving environments, whether you have stacks. And it's a mess if you would consider 2 very similar genome edited crops, which you put together, and we have a stacked event again. And it's unbelievable what you need to provide on data. Yes, statistics, uncertainty, there's always uncertainty. And all right, if you really continue with this kind of steps with the classical GMOs, I think we all agree that it would be impossible to get these GE crops to the market. And coming back to a previous question here in the audience, I think nearly all member states, as far as I see, have learned that the current legislation is not anymore state of the art. But most member states still disagree what will be the way out. So that will take a couple of time to get out of this. So what have you seen in the last 30 years of experimental releases, more than 20 years of commercial cultivation? And I look back on a report I wrote with other authors 11, 12 years ago for the Commission. And since then, everything is still the same. So it's we have seen adverse long-term effects published for resistance development, but this is not GM specific, on target organisms in BT crops, and we have seen weeds in herbicide tolerance cropping, but nothing more. And what we see is that BT and herbicide use is now restricted in some areas, but that was expected and nothing more. And I think this data we have on this, let's say, long-term period should also be taken into account for classical GMOs when we talk about maybe legislation improvement. I know this will take some time, not only to concentrate on genome edited plants, but also on the classical transgenic plants. I'm not saying that classical transgenic plants do not need any regulation. Please don't count me wrong here, but we need a strong differentiation. And so my conclusion here is that in a science-based comparative approach, genome-edited crops with genetic mutations similar to classical breeding, for example, with no foreign DNA inserted or cisgenics, do not require a comprehensive risk assessment. So that's my personal one. But, and Peter Sandman would now say, the risk that hurt people and the risk that upset people are almost completely unconnected. That's a cultural thing. And maybe for the discussion, so I'm working in these 5 circles. So scientific research is important, risk assessment is important. Risk management is maybe the most disputed, coming then to policy making and public perception. And when we have heard the word innovation and precaution, and precaution only applies to risk management. If we have really identified risk or have really no data on something, then we need to be more careful. But innovation takes place and at all other circles, and we need to take this into account when we look on now climate change, that is a real threat to European agriculture. Yes, I can stop here, but I have another slide, just as a reserve one, and because this relates to my former speakers, we see that innovation takes place in the technology, so the feasibility is there. I think also the business could be there as well, but we have human values, and Marcel, yes, there is the public perception, and if they don't want to buy genome edited plants, there would be also no innovation. So we need to have maybe good products. And this is my favorite, the regulation. We need an encouraging regulation and not a discouraging one. And this one I would like to stop. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Detlef. Excuse me. I think there are a number of questions. So Dragana, can you introduce the questions?
Okay, again, questions in chat and comments. And first I will give a word to René. René, could you, because you had a few comments, would you like to present them?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. No, I just was making a small comment, on what the ruling actually said. Many people are stating, and the ruling has stated that all genome-edited crops are GMOs. I think we should be precise in the way we formulate things. The ruling hasn't even used the word genome editing. It has only stated that organisms resulting from new mutagenesis techniques are not exempted from the directive. That is the actual case. And how that is then further interpreted, that is, I think, we can have a longer discussion about it. Another question I would have, I think, what Detlef was stating at the end is very interesting in the sense, okay, I think for certain types of GE crops, I don't think there is a need for a comprehensive environmental risk assessment. If you think you don't need a comprehensive environmental risk assessment, what do you still think is necessary in terms of environmental risk assessment for such crops?
Personally, if you look only on, if you don't introduce foreign DNA, let's say in this way, I think you can stop on the molecular characterization, because the risk is similar to what we have seen in classical breeding, including chemical and radiation mutagenesis. So it's still some requirement for applicants to demonstrate that there is no foreign DNA left of maybe the vector system or so, and then fine with me. Then that's coherent with the system we have.
Also in cases where you have multiplexed 20 edits?
I think this is case specific. if you can, with multiplexing, maybe as a question of time, achieve the same thing. Maybe in one locus in wheat. Huh? So if you edit all 6 locuses in wheat, you can achieve the question of time. Huh? It's a question of resources. Then it would also, for me, can be exempted. But if you just theoretically, if you have 300 edits, single edits, and maybe change a whole regulatory sequence, that's maybe, no, that's definitely different. Although I know that every tissue cultivar step, as you have seen in table 1 of the slides, already introduces a lot of variation, and I think it's impossible to distinguish what's the cause of the variation you get with every step, right?
We have another question from Eric Toussaint. I will give him a floor. Eric. Eric, okay.
We will see. Thank you. So Detlef, about the cartoon you showed us, I'm a bit worried because we from science and from technology, we tend to make mistakes by I'd say knocking opponents against the head by ridiculizing their feelings, their opinions. So, of course, this is an internal group. I think there are only people here around who are more or less in favor of using new plant breeding technologies. I still think it's wise to think of those things and better try to understand why people are opposed to it and use that knowledge for making choices in where to use new techniques, and also about communication.
I hope I was not misunderstood with the cartoon. I still think it's very important to work for better nutrition, more healthy food. In a legal sense, and though the regulation, the GM regulation is written and is applied in most legislations all over the world, it's a comparative assessment. And the problems we have outside GMOs, but where other problems are put on top, need to be solved on other places. So we have also with Nevena, now you have told that maybe in the near future, no, we have not already now more adipose people than hungry people in the world. So that's a huge problem. And but genome editing maybe can solve this problem by producing healthier food. But the major thing we need to do is in education and whatever, but cannot be solved by you as molecular scientists, right? But okay, I get your point. We need to be careful with examples. Thanks.
Okay, no more questions. So Jeremy.
There are no more questions?
No, there are no more questions, so we can proceed.
In fact, I think I put one question in chat, if I may, to Detlef. Just a quick one, really. Have there been any applications for gene-edited plants in the EU? And also, how is the issue of unique identifiers dealt with?
There are some field trial applications, and I know also from discussions with at least some German scientists who think what would be required to make an application. It's quite difficult even to define the event of what is what should they apply? Because you have some variation. If you edit your plants, you have maybe a mixture of very small edits. And if you need to describe everything very detailed, even for a field release, that could be a problem. And of course, then the real big problem when it comes to cultivation, the normal requirement as unique identifier for the Joint Research Center to be tested is not anymore possible for these small changes. So the law as we have it now would prevent definitely small genome editing plants to reach the market. And the other really big thing is the worldwide development. So we cannot enforce the law for those imports where other countries have decided that this is not a GMO. We can try to do so with very few cases, but my wild guess is we will in the future see many imports undetected.
Okay, thanks very much, Detlef. We're running a bit behind and the chairman is waving a big stick, so I think we better keep going. We'll come back to this probably in the discussion at the end. Okay, so now I'd like to hand over to Hilde-Gunn Sorteberg from the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, who is going to tell us all about communication and so on. So over to you, Hilde-Gunn.
Just a moment. There it should be. Do you see something happening now?
Can you go to presentation format?
Yes, I'll just...
down at the bottom.
Yes, the bottom disappears when I get this one on. So let's see. You
go to the bottom of your screen, that's it.
That's it?
Okay, thank you.
Good. I'll start at the beginning. So since we're a bit behind schedule, I'll try to make some of it quick, and as you will get the presentation afterwards, I think that should be okay. So I've also, as Marcel said, sort of adjusted my title, but I'll get back to that. So I hope I will give you all some pieces of interesting information or findings from real communication experts, and also some advances of genome editing that I think is really exciting. So first, I changed risks and benefits to options, and I think the information gap is real, as is shown in these posts where they say something about the actual danger and what people think. And that resistance to new stuff, even though we are wired to adopt it, we are still pretty conservative in some respects. So first, I think that the risks and benefits or options are well covered by EFSA and other similar bodies in other countries. So I will not go into that, but look at the communication part of it. And as we've seen from other communication meetings in another cost action, communication is increasingly challenging because the attention gap is noisy or packed. But we still have a brain that is wired for change, so we can't repeat what has been said. We have to pack it in another way. And I will get back to that with some examples. And I agree with the previous speakers that policymakers, even though they have a lifespan maybe of 4 years, they should understand the consequences of their choices and what they do, or at least consumers or inhabitants should make them do so. I believe, and I think a lot of people still agree that it should be science-based, even though that is being challenged, and that, of course, as Marcel said, is really difficult. So, but that discussion, I'm sure, will keep going. And I believe, finally, that good solutions or good examples can make a change. And I will get back to that. And I think this, one of the main take-home messages I've learned from working with communication the last few years is the fine balance, this balance between informing and understanding, and the balance between explaining but not advertising or not sound like a bad commercial. That is really difficult. So to talk to people and respect them and inform them and give them the ground to make informed decision, I think is a challenge we will keep working at. And as I will get back to, some people or some findings on communication says that it's better to use, for instance, beekeepers than scientists to deliver a message, because people feel about bees. Scientists, that can vary. So this is Jura Østlien. He gave a talk in February this year in another cost action, and he was showing how the COVID-19 world changed how the world was run. And this, at the end, you will get a YouTube link to a video made for the Norwegian Health Authority, where he says that suddenly, who is speaking? It's not the prime minister or the politicians, it's the scientists. So in a way, we have a specific time reality that could be to our benefit if we are able to feel it, I think. And he's made this acronym THUNK that's kind of weird, but he says that the message has to be trustworthy, but not boring. You have to touch people emotionally, otherwise they won't really care. It should be optimistic rather than pessimistic. And you need to have a narrative that is facts and informative, and you have to be creative to stand out, but not crazy. And of course, that is also challenging. He said that since the world suddenly then started getting run by scientists, or at least their advices, and then vaccine as a technology was our way out, even though some people might not have wanted it in the first place. Most see the point. And that our brain, if you think of us as hunters, we are wired to notice changes. So we need to change pace or do something to get the attention. And some people are really good at it. This Greta, we might think or have different ideas of how she operates, but she's clear, and she reaches out to people, and maybe her demand of more plant-based food could be a way of accepting food changes that might be more sustainable, and maybe indirectly even then change the look upon GMOs, as I will get back to in the impossible foods. So the first thing for communication, you need to create relevance, and COVID-19 certainly has done so. And this is a journalist that is also good at getting attention, and is saying that to save our planet, we have to change our food solutions. And I will get back to a Finnish example that he's pointing to that is exciting, but very far from the normal diet we are consuming. This impossible food, I think, is the most exciting when it comes to using GM technology and being open and good at communicating it. This biochemistry professor from Stanford started a startup in Silicon Valley, and decided that the 95% meat eaters in the world needs to be fed more plant-based food. And to do so, one should make food products that taste like meat, but are plant-based or completely plant, 100% plant. So he said, what makes meat taste meat? And he said it was the hemoglobin. So he found a gene in plants, put it into microorganism, and produced this blood soup that you see these technicians fills into the plant paste. And that really changes the sustainability of the burgers. And that has hit the American market with a crazy success beyond what anybody thought possible. And it's also changed the debate on GMO in the US, at least. But what it will do for Europe, we don't know. There are plenty of examples that Europe is also excited about it and might welcome it. And EFSA is risk assessing it, and we'll see what happens there and what might happen in the Commission. If you see here, this is just a picture I took when the world was still open, from a menu at the Munich airport, where they say no meat, impossible, classic burger. So this is not an impossible food burger, but they're still hinting to this new development. And so far we have Beyond Meat in Europe, since that is not GM based. But the Impossible Food say clearly that they need to add this gene to make it sustainable. Otherwise, they would have to take it from soybean roots, and that would cause a lot of soil erosion and so on. But this is the finished product that is really claiming that the sustainability will be way beyond anything we have now, because they have no waste. They use energy from the air. And they can do it in desert regions of the world where you can't grow plants, for instance. So that, to me, even though it might not be the gourmet meat or meal you would like to consume, it could really change the some basic food availability for many people. So another question that has been raised by many in these communication meetings we've had is that, what do people really need or want to know? Most of us don't understand how a mobile phone is made, but we still accept and use it. And some say that we don't need to have a 50% majority of attitudes, but we need to inform opinion formers. And ideally create a consumer-driven demand. And I think one important issue in Europe, it goes a bit to ideology, as discussed earlier by Marcel, is that food is culture. But we might have cultivated nature much longer than we have expected or thought so far. Like there has been some reports saying that we started burning woods maybe 100,000 years ago to make it easier to hunt or get food. And so maybe this unspoiled nature is more cultured nature than we expected. But still we have to, of course, take care of it. But this sustainability, I think, needs to be based on a real understanding of reality if we are going to succeed. So this is Mark Linus, that some of you might know from demonstrations towards GMOs before he changed stance. And he said, this was at an RNAi meeting. So he said, no, nobody knows what the heck RNAi is. Some more knows what genome editing is, but still not the majority of consumers. And he was the one saying that we don't need a referendum. So maybe we should think a bit differently in how we focus our communication. And so these two guys is the most exciting I've heard this year on communication. They are from Greenlight. Thomas has experience from New York Times, which have a lot of nice podcasts that I listen to. Their conclusions from studies they made on consumer acceptance and how communication works is that bees and butterflies can be helpful, and for RNAi and some of these genetic changes, that to use that a metaphor like a trainer in telling how the plants can be trained at dealing with challenges and so on, or to explain some type of technologies. And this is from Greg Watson Bayer in a meeting we had in February, where he said something about wording. That's important to choose our words with cautious and not use words that will be misunderstood by the general public. So like for RNAi to talk about silences or knockouts, we might do that with CRISPR-2, for instance. That is not a good picture in people's mind. This, I think, is an exciting take-home message when it comes to the technology. Jennifer Doudna has an institute in San Francisco together with people working at Sustainable Agriculture, Public Health, Advancing Genome Engineering and Human Health. And they say that the main challenge of genome editing is still gene transfer. And recently at UC Davis, there is a group working on wheat genomics that have really made a difference when it comes to frequencies, so transgenic frequencies, so that they have managed to, by combining microRNA with meristem genes, they have managed to regenerate much higher number of plants and make even species or genotypes that have been difficult to transform earlier, they are transformable by this combination. And what they say is that this has made them able to make close to saturated mutant collection of wheat, which of course is a great tool. But they say that it's hampered by regulations, and maybe some of the audience here can help me understand this, because in a meeting we had, we were not quite sure what of the regulations of genome editing that made it difficult. Some said it with the patent, you could only genome edit one gene and not make stacks, and that would make this combination impossible. Or maybe, in my mind, it could be that it would be regarded as a GM even outside Europe if you stack genes. I don't know, but at least what they said in the US was that the companies then go for tilling, since they have to avoid the genome editing solution. So this is George, who has done this work in wheat, and I've heard he's getting a lot of attention, and to me it looks really exciting that you can combine what you know about meristematic genes that make cells divide, and that way regenerate more plants. And by the genome editing and the microRNA, you can then achieve functional genomics. And these are just some videos we made early in this action for general people with an interest of genome editing, not for scientists. And I think Kai really addressed the bull by the horn in his way of saying how the European Union and policy makers and regulators might act. That is also entertaining for students, for instance. So my final kick is that the public is open to sustainable food solutions, and I hope that could be a gateway for us to give solutions and explain why they would be good solutions. And communication it's important that we hit this wave or this impact, and to get impact and change while we have it. So I think the COVID-19 might have been an aid first. And I think this communication also is important for the future of cost. So thank you. And I hope that we will get to meet in situ soon and not continue like this for very much longer. This is just an overview of the 3 videos and some slides that could start a discussion if needed, but I think we are good at discussing without them. So just forget them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Hilde-Gunn. Are there any questions, Dragana, specifically to Hilde-Gunn?
No, there are no. We have some useful links in the chat and also link to the paper by Detlef. So just that everyone can see. And that's a take-home message for us when we organize meeting, that chat is always better than Q&A because no questions in Q&A. So it's over to you, Jared.
Okay, thanks. Dragana, what do you want to do about the questionnaire? Do you want to talk about that later?
As we are a bit behind the schedule, we can leave it. We will present it as a report on the website and give us slides and give you, because it will be illustrated and the most used word, but just briefly, everybody thinks that it will, the genome editing will contribute to sustainable agriculture, climate resilience, that regulatory issues are the main obstacle to wider acceptance of genome editing, and that communication issues should be resolved through open dialogue. So that's briefly from the survey, and we can discuss about that in live, I hope, in Lecce this autumn. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, we'll look forward to seeing the full report on that. I think before we close, I'd like to leave an opportunity for anybody else to comment. I think, René, you wanted to come back on some of the things that Detlef and some others had said. Do you want to say something, René? René Custers?
We need to give him a word. I will enable him to talk. Okay, René?
Well, the only additional comment I made was about field trial applications and experiences concerning that in terms of the problems that exist for identification of genome edited crops. We have experience with submitting a field trial application for genome edited maize, where indeed as part of the dossier we need to submit an identification method. But of course, in that specific case, we were not able to provide a real identification method. The only thing we could do was repeat the methods that we had used to do the molecular characterization of the event and put a big disclaimer on that, but this does not enable you to really identify. Well, the experience we've had in Belgium, this was not seen as something that would well, block the dossier. So it was accepted as that, and we also got the permit following that dossier.
Okay, well, that's good. At least it presents some hope, even if it's just limited to field trials. Are there any other comments, particularly from the speakers? Do you want to come back on anything that you've heard during the webinar?
Maybe,
yes, yes.
Jeremy, as a reply to René, we as the German competent authority would most likely do the same if we get an application like in Belgium, that we do not that we are not as strong as for the commercialization stage, but it's a tricky thing. You know, you need to to make progress in science, to collect environmental data. And at the time when the system is so restrictive that you can't, then there's something really wrong. With that, I must apologize because I have to leave now for an additional meeting to give another talk. So I leave you alone, and I enjoyed it so far, and thanks a lot for listening, and take care.
Okay, well, thank you, Detlef, and it's nice to see that you're still in big demand. Okay, any other comments from any of the speakers or contributors? Or Dennis, do you want to make a few final comments on this webinar?
Yeah, just to wrap up and say it was a very nice presentations that gave a very broad overview of the whole issue with the impact of these new technologies. So I really want to thank all the speakers, and I want to thank you, Dragana and Jeremy, as moderators of this webinar.
Okay, thank you. Dragana, you can have the last word as the main coordinator of this webinar.
I would just like to thank you all the presenters to having time to be with us today, even we know that they are all busy, and I hope next time we will have a live meeting, and I think the discussions will be more fruitful, and I thank all the people who stayed with us all this time and the commenters, because like this you made our webinar worth it. And just to say that you will see everything on PlantEd webpage, and we are always open for your comments and ideas how to improve the work of PlantEd and of our working group. Thank you.
Okay, and so I'd just like to say a final thank you to everybody concerned, and please keep in touch. If you have any comments or questions or whatever, please send them to Dragana, Dennis, or myself. And for those of you involved in the PlantEd cost action, hopefully we will all be meeting in Italy in September. But let's hope that the vaccination program with these genetically engineered vaccines continues at a high pace and everybody accepts them, because I think that's one of the solutions. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you,
bye.
And bye. Okay.